Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Medlock Post radio show. This is where we educate, entertain, enlighten, and empower. The views and opinions on the Medlock Post radio show are those of the host and guests. They are not necessarily the views and opinions of Blog Talk Radio, Spreaker.com, its corporations, affiliates, or any other podcast streaming services. Thank you for joining the show today, and here is your host, Richard G. Medlock.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is your host, Richard G. Medlock. Yes, we're in the studios of the Medlock Post radio show on this beautiful, beautiful October 7th. Well, at least where we are. Some places, they have beautiful weather, but like in Florida and the coast of South Carolina and North Carolina, they're still trying to pick up some ugly pieces that happened last week. And our thoughts and our prayers continue to go out to them. And I'm going to go back to what I keep saying. Get the federal government out of the way. Get them out of the way. Now, our program today, episode 63, is Who Will Defend the U.S. Constitution? And ladies and gentlemen, that's a great question for us to consider, and we're going to talk about that's going to be some of our main focus today. Now, heads up for next week. Monday is Columbus Day, and we're going to hold a history class on Monday about Christopher Columbus, and we're probably going to talk about some things you have never heard about Christopher Columbus, his life, and his journey to what he thought was East Asia. But whoops, there was this whole other continent in between. So we'll do that Monday. Wednesday, Diane Canada, the executive director of Lady Up America, will be back with us to tell us about some of her experiences she had in her travels and meetings with women A lot of them in Florida. She was down there. She had to leave early because of the hurricane. And also on Wednesday or Thursday, we will have the executive director and president of American Hispanic Women's Association. Again, part of the celebration of Hispanic Heritage Month. So those two, Wednesday and Thursday, will be some excellent conversations to have. You want to tune in and listen to those. All right, this morning, folks, right now the market is down 245, Nasdaq's down 199, and S&P is down 48. Why? Because this morning's job report came out. It added only 263,000. Now, the market was up about 60, 70 points when the announcement came out, and immediately, you just boom, the market went down 200 points. Boom. Why? Because the mindset right now is 250,000 jobs added is strengthening the economy. You remember under Trump, we had sometimes 900,000 a month, 800,000 jobs being added. 250,000 is not a strong economy. But the stock market thinks so, and thinks that the Fed is going to continue to raise rates under the false assumption that the more people that are working, it's going to cause inflation to go up. Really. So the more people working, the more inflation is going to be. Well, let's go back under Trump. Had under 2% inflation under Trump and added millions and millions and millions of jobs. The highest job total in history. And across the board, women, blacks, Hispanics, etc. Wages were going up more for the lower income than the higher income. No inflation. So this fallacy, more people working is going to cause inflation. What's causing inflation is government policies and regulations, and the Fed not knowing what they're doing. Well, I take that back. They know what they're doing. They want to destroy this country. Now, the 10-year bond rate this morning is 3.9%. The 2-year Treasury is 4.333%. They keep going up. So you have this 2-year higher than the 10-year. That's the inversion curve, and that means recession. I didn't get the 30-year bond, but it's probably higher or lower too. So anyway, that's what's going on there. So we're not out of the woods yet, folks, by a long shot. All right. Let's go over a few. Let me read this quote by Carl Sagan. Nothing disturbs me more than the glorification of stupidity. Okay, folks, wear that, put that in your hat and wear it. All right. A federal judge or federal court the other day, again, like the 5th or 6th time, has ruled that the Dreamers Act, or DACA, D-A-C-A, legal. Remember how that started under Obama? It was an executive order to legalize children under 18 that came into this country, legally or illegally. Well, basically illegally. That they were just given citizenship. Well, 3 courts under Obama said, no. It's illegal. You can't do that. Stop it. And the Obama administration just ignored it. Again, now, and Trump came into office, got a ruling again that DACA, because it was still going on, DACA was illegal. But Trump put it to Congress. Do something about this. Get a bill going to do something about this. And Congress did nothing, even when the Republicans were in the majority. Then Biden gets into office and he starts pushing DACA again. Of course, they open the border. And then the judge the other day said, no, stop it. It's illegal. It goes back to the fact a president cannot create law. We're going to talk about that later on, about something that Biden came up with yesterday. Or somebody that he didn't come up with, somebody else did. On Wednesday, I told you that OPEC Plus was meeting and was going to lower production output on oil. Everybody's expecting $1 million or 1 million barrels a day. They came out 2 billion barrels a day that they're going to cut production. And guess who drove that decision? That is correct, Russia. So now Biden knows he's in a pickle. And what does he do? He's been negotiating with Maduro in Venezuela, who is as bad or worse a dictator as they have in Cuba, the Castros. And so he says yesterday after this, I'll tell you what, we're going to remove some of these sanctions off of Venezuela so we can get more oil from Venezuela. You're sitting on top of one of the largest oil reserves right here in America, and you want to look elsewhere. Plus, he's going to extract 10 million barrels out of the Petroleum Strategic Reserve, which is, again, it's down to about half of what it was, could lead to disaster in the United States. This guy's doing everything to bring this down. It goes back to the article I read Wednesday. Again, inflation for food is over 13%. The United States Army missed recruitment by 15,000 recruits. I wonder why. You know why. The Biden administration has increased national debt in 2 years by $8 trillion in less than 2 years. It's over $31 trillion now. But in 2 years, $8 trillion has been added to the debt. Since January 21st of 2021 to the end of September of this year. For the fiscal year for the government from October 1st, 2021 to September 30th this year, they brought in $4.4 trillion in revenues and added more than that to the national debt. Wow. George Orwell said, it's frightful that people who are so ignorant should have so much power. General Electric, they're getting ready to split into two companies. I've got some friends that work there, and they said it's almost chaos over there right now. GE is laying off 20% of its workforce devoted to this, folks, devoted to onshore wind power, costing hundreds of jobs. What does that tell you? They know there's no money in wind power. Let's put other things into perspective. Consumer credit card debt is at its highest level ever in the history of the United States. For the second quarter of 2022, it increased $890 billion. Now, you want to know another number? This number will blow your mind. Total household debt through the second quarter of 2022, $16.5 trillion. Half of what the national debt is. So if we add those two together, 31, and it's like 31.3 or 4 now. So we come up with $48 trillion in debt in the United States of America, household debt and the national debt. This does not count corporate debt, pension debt or responsibilities, and under, Medicare, Medicaid, welfare, doesn't include any of that. A little wake-up call, folks. All right. This was sent to me. It's entitled, "We the People Must." And it was written by C. McMasters, a PhD, at the Liberty Bell, Belle. Now, there's no date. This is dated October 2nd. And I don't know if that's when he wrote it. But anyway, I'm going to assume that's when this thing came out. All right. We the people must protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. Duh. And this is quoting Professor McMaster. I published an article this past Monday, one that discussed the importance and significance of the oaths of office our government officials take when they step into their government positions. But as I was thinking about it more today, I became more convinced of this simple reality. The oath of office is meant to stir us, we the people, into the realization that our government doesn't protect and defend government, the country, liberty, or even the people. It protects and defends the Constitution above all else. The Constitution says, I will protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign or domestic, right? Continuing. We the people must first be convinced of this reality before any government official will care to be convinced of it. It's the passion and reverence of the people for the Constitution. The law outside of government that empowers the law outside of government and motivates those in government both to know and follow this law. So it goes back to we that have to keep reminding those in office, you have one role: protect and defend the Constitution. Why take an oath to something that you know those who hired you have no consideration or respect for? How much power does such an oath hold? That's a powerful question. Two questions there. And this is why I'm going into this, to help you understand the critical context of the Constitution and how it's been lost. Back to the article. Truly, what better way to destroy the power of something or someone than to destroy the respect for that something or someone? Destroy the power of something or someone, that's how you do it. Okay? How many times have we seen this? We'll get into something else about this. You've heard me talk about the communist goals to take over America. And of course, a couple of them were to get you to think the Constitution means nothing today. It was written by a bunch of white supremacists who only wanted to protect themselves, and it was only good for that time, and things have changed. It's no good. Back to the article. There is no need to destroy the Constitution if one can destroy the citizens' respect and reverence for the Constitution. What government official would fight to confine her own power if she knows her citizenry has no care to see her power confined? So you see, Washington, D.C. knows that there's enough people out there that don't care about the Constitution and really doesn't care about what they do. So they just keep stepping beyond the bounds, keep pushing that line more and more out into the open, further and further down the road. Back to the article. The erosion of even the idea of constitutionalism should be of a great concern for those of us in America who desire limitations on government power. Consider this quote from the book, The Concept of Constitution in the History of Political Thought, discussing the origins of the idea of constitutionalism. Quote, this should be a heavy quote for, that was the quote. Okay. This should be a heavy quote for anyone invested in preserving the United States Constitution. This indifference in the masses, let me read that again. This indifference in the masses is precisely what suffocates and slowly kills any power the Constitution or even the idea of constitutionalism hold. Without a citizenry passionate for and educated about the critical importance of the Constitution, indifference will germinate and grow. And as indifference grows in the masses, indifference or lack of respect grows in the chamber halls of government itself. He's painting the picture here of how it works. We don't have to destroy the Constitution. We just have to get the citizenry to think it doesn't matter. And the democratic Marxists have done a good job of that. And the school system has done a good job of that. Back to this article. Which one causes which? Is government attempting to destroy all respect for the Constitution and the citizenry is complying? Or has the citizenry simply lost respect and therefore the government does the same? Perhaps in a mixture of both, but we can only control our actions and our choice to refuse indifference. So let's go back to these questions. Which one causes which? Back in the 30s and 40s, communism knew that they could not forcibly come into the United States and take over. So they devised the plan, 46 goals, to take over America. One of those goals was to get control of a political party in America. I think we can safely say they've gotten control of more than one. One completely, the other one partly. So did the citizenry just simply lose respect? No. This was a step-by-step process. And then in the late 60s and 70s, you get all these hippies, these anti-establishment people protesting all over the place. And you can say, well, it was all about the Vietnam War. It was more than that, folks. They were protesting everything and burned down a lot of things. So when the federal government got control of the education system in the 70s, they started dumbing down the population. Another article to talk about that. Back to this. Perhaps the root of the indifference is that few, if any, Americans truly understand why Constitution matters, much less why it should be followed. Few know the true consequences of life without a Constitution. He's talking about anarchy here and also tyranny. Many from all different political persuasions feel in their guts that it should be followed, can articulate why. Well, they're asking the wrong ones. You know, they go on these college campuses and start asking them about the Constitution, and they don't know anything. Back to the article. And that simple lack of understanding is all that's necessary to allow indifference to set in. There are even some who wish for the Constitution to be violated, not understanding the dire consequences such violations breed. Well, folks, we are witnessing many of those violations today in America. Back to this article by Professor McMaster. Gets you thinking, doesn't it? Did me when I read through it. And this lack of understanding comes from a place of ignorance. And perhaps this ignorance comes from a place of indifference, leaving us in a destructive feedback loop that has no escape. We're indifferent because we're ignorant, and we're ignorant because we're indifferent. So he says, if you don't care about anything and willing to stay in your ignorance, then that's fine. It is not. It is not fine. I'm going to throw in a quote here by Noam Chomsky. Quote, nobody is going to pour truth into your brain. It's something you have to find out for yourself, unquote. You want to learn something, you got to go do it yourself. And see, this is what the school system did. It says, parents, don't worry about it. We will educate your kids. Don't worry about it. We'll educate them. They'll be fine. Well, guess what? Nope, it hadn't been fine. And I also did, the article's not over, but I'm throwing this in. Professor McMaster's, he deals with these college kids. And he's seeing this firsthand, this indifference and this ignorance. They just don't care because they haven't been taught anything. They haven't been taught to love America and its principles and its values. A lot of them have been taught to hate it, to hate capitalism, to embrace socialism. Back to the article. And as that feedback loop continues to endlessly rotate, the power of the Constitution continues to wane like a dying star clinging to its last embers. That's a powerful comment. People think that the Constitution will get to a point that it will hang by a thread. Now, I think we're a long way from there, I hope. But that's what he's saying here. Continuing. Yes, I'm sure much of this ignorance has been perpetuated intentionally by those in power to keep themselves in power, to avoid having to limit their power. Do we talk about that a lot? Yes. But fundamentally, we were the ones who first put them in power, and we're the ones who keep them in power. If we truly wanted to break out of our endless feedback cycle, we could. We're the employers, after all. But we must first identify and face our indifference to the Constitution and our ignorance of the Constitution. Without facing reality, we can't begin to repair what's broken. Get that? Without facing reality. Don't go stick your head in the sand. Now, a lot of people are waking up to this. And we've had Joni Bryan on here from the 917 Society that is putting pocket constitutions into the schools around this country, and the feedback has been phenomenal. So we're getting there. Continuing. Spread these articles on the Constitution far and wide, my friends. I've seen that the embers of passion lying dormant in the hearts of so many Americans can be stoked into a raging flame if given the right tools and information. Folks, that's why the Medlock Post is here, to do what I just read that Professor McMaster said needs to happen. Continuing with him. I've heard from many individuals who have been enlightened to the reason why our government must follow the Constitution, and all it took to spur into action was a brief escape from their feedback loop, a breaking of ignorance. So we say it's not that hard, and it isn't, folks. Finishing up. Friends, we must not assume that the Constitution will survive without a citizenry bent on fighting for its survival. We must face any and all indifference and ignorance that we still allow to live within ourselves or those around us, and we must fight to rectify that which is broken. Because I ask, if we don't, who will? Professor McMaster, thank you. Thank you for this article, pinpointing what we need to do, just like with Russell Voigt the other day. Renew American purpose. Put it back in context. This is what we need. I hear from the listeners. I hear from you. And a lot of you are getting excited. You've gone back to studying the Constitution. You've gone back to reading. You've gone back to researching. I ran into a friend the other day, and she said, this was concerning my thing on September 23rd I did on scouting, because it's the anniversary of my Eagle Scout Award on the 24th. She said, I just started doing research on the Scouts. And the beauty of that program, unfortunately, that has been taken over by the Woke Society, and that's her words. But she said, this is what we need. And she went by a letter to Norman Rockwell. She says, I didn't realize he did all those paintings for the Boy Scouts. She said, those are beautiful. So you see, you broaden your horizon. You get away from your indifference. You do away with your ignorance, but you have to do it yourself. We can guide you. We can plant the seed, but you have to do it yourself. All right, let me play this soundbite, and this is from the 917 Society. It's Dr. Swain, and I guess I should have called it in Dr. McMaster. He was a PhD. I apologize. Dr. McMaster instead of professor. Dr. Carol Swain from LSU, retired, but she was a law professor and a constitutional professor. Let's listen to her for a couple of minutes.
The Constitution is what ensures our freedom and our liberties, our individual rights. For over 200 years, the U.S. Constitution has stood the test of time. It has been able to provide the stability necessary for our government. It's important for every student, every person to understand the U.S. Constitution because it forms the basis for all of our rights. Without the Constitution, we would not have the right to bear arms, the right to a trial by jury, a right to the freedoms and things that we take for granted, such as due process, equal rights. Under the Constitution, every man and every woman is equal in the eyes of the state. It's important for you to know the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and everything connected to it so that you can fight for the things that have helped make America great. It's very important for us to have a nation where people can express their viewpoints. They need to have the freedom to disagree with the government, the freedom to be heard, the freedom to protest in an orderly manner. It's important for you to know that the framers wanted to create the environment where you would have a marketplace of competing ideas. And so the best ideas would win the day, and everyone would have an equal opportunity to persuade others to their viewpoint. You cannot persuade others. You cannot have a conversation if only one side gets to speak. Our Constitution was set up to guarantee every American the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, and the freedom of assembly. Unless you know your rights, you will not be able to stand up and defend and protect our Constitution. You can equip yourself to be an effective citizen by reading and studying your Constitution, fighting for the rights that you know that the framers intended every American to have. Back when they drafted the Constitution, they had no idea what the world would look like in the 21st century, yet in their wisdom, they created a document that can be amended and can be changed and can address the issues and times of our day. The 917 Society is important because of its goal to teach students about the Constitution. Every American, every citizen and non-citizen needs to know about the Constitution. It is our rule book. It is the basis of the rule of law in America. As an American, I'm proud of my Constitution, and I believe you should be proud of it too.
Thank you, Dr. Swain. Great counsel from her. Great counsel from Dr. McMaster. And might even try to get him on the program. I'll see if through the 917 Society. It's 917society.org. They're putting pocket constitutions into schools in all 50 states. Check them out, folks. A $25 donation will put pocket constitutions in per classroom. Okay. A little news items from yesterday that are kind of buggers. This is from The Hill. Pentagon chief gives go-ahead to change military bases named Confederate generals. Defense Secretary Lord Austin has given the go-ahead to alter the names of some 1,111 military installations and facilities related to the Confederacy, according to a new memo released Thursday. Following a final report from the Naming Commission, which last month put forward a suggestion to rename or remove the more than 1,100 items that fall under the preview of the Defense Department, Austin has concurred with all the Commission's recommendations and is committed to implementing them as soon as possible, Press Secretary Brigadier General Pat Ryder said in a statement. Notice it's just Confederate names. Now I ask you, what's the difference? Yeah, Robert E. Lee was in the Confederacy, so we're going to take his name off of everything. A graduate of West Point. And other than Robert E. Lee, how many of you can name other generals from the Confederacy? Oh, yeah, Stonewall Jackson. Okay. Who else? No, I'm not going to give you the answer. If we went out on the street and asked people, how many Confederate generals can you name? How many could not even name Robert E. Lee? I'm telling you, 98% of people in America could care less. We're catering to the 1%, 2%, 3% of wokies out there that want to change America. That's one item. Electric vehicles are exploding from water damage after Hurricane Ian. A top Florida state official warned Thursday that firefighters have battled a number of fires caused by electrical vehicle batteries, waterlogged from Hurricane Ian. EV batteries that have been waterlogged in the wake of the hurricane are at risk of corrosion, which could lead to unexpected fires, according to Jimmy Petronas, the state's top financial officer and fire marshal. There's a ton of EVs disabled from Ian as those batteries corrode, fires start. Remember, this was salt water, folks. This isn't rainwater from driving down the street. This was salt water. That's a new challenge that our firefighters haven't faced before, at least on this kind of scale. It takes special training and understanding of EVs to ensure these fires are put out quickly and safely. Okay. So, clue there, whether they're this 1%, less than 1% of the cars on the road are electric vehicles. And of course, Biden wants to have all the government vehicles, federal government vehicles, be electric. And he's getting a lot of pushback on that. Okay, here's the third one. And this is a little bit about what we've been talking about. This was yesterday's statement from President Biden on marijuana reform. So we're going to reform marijuana, folks. Excuse me. This was his statement that was put out yesterday. Or I hope you're sitting down. If you're driving, maybe slow down 5 miles per hour. Keep your eyes on the road. Don't react until you get somewhere. Yeah, it's that bad, folks. As I often said, this is President Obama. As I often said during my campaign for president, no one should be in jail just for using or possessing marijuana. I think it is imperative that these people are released from prison so they can vote Democrat in November. No, I added that. I couldn't resist, folks, because that's what this is. It's all about getting votes. It has nothing to do with right and wrong. All right, let me start over. I only read one sentence that was correct. All right. As I, Joe Biden, often said during my campaign for president, no one should be in jail just for using or possessing marijuana. Sending people to prison for possessing marijuana has upended too many lives and incarcerated people who conduct that many states no longer prohibit. Criminal records for marijuana possession have also imposed needless barriers to employment, housing, and educational opportunities. And while white and black and brown people use marijuana at similar rates, black and brown people have been arrested, prosecuted, and convicted at disproportionate rates. That's the first paragraph. I'm challenging what he's saying here. Criminal records for marijuana possession have also imposed needless barriers to employment, housing, and educational opportunities. Where? Where's your proof? And while white and black and brown people use marijuana at similar rates, where's your proof? Show us the proof. Black and brown people have been arrested, persecuted, and convicted at disproportionate rates. Really? How many decades have we heard that? Oh, blacks are prosecuted more than whites. And I'm sure you're sitting there, well, wait a minute. Well, they get arrested and they can't afford attorneys, so they make the rich people get off with these big attorneys. No. All right, anyway. Continuing with Joe Biden. Today, I am announcing 3 steps that I am taking to end this failed approach. Upholding the law is a failed result. Oh, okay. So not upholding it is success. I guess southern border is an example. First, I am announcing a pardon for all prior federal offenses of simple possession of marijuana. I have directed the Attorney General to develop an administrative process for the issuance of certificates of pardon to eligible individuals. There are thousands of people who have prior federal convictions for marijuana possession who may be denied employment, housing, or educational opportunities as a result. My action will help relieve the collateral consequences arising from these convictions. How many of you believe that? Will relieve the collateral consequences. How many of you believe that? Back to Mr. Biden. Second, I am urging all governors to do the same with regard to state offenses. Just as no one should be in a federal prison solely due to possession of marijuana, no one should be in a local jail or state prison for that reason either. So now he's urging all governors to follow his wise and all omnipotent wisdom here. Joe Biden. Third, I am asking the Secretary of Health and Human Services and the Attorney General to initiate the administrative process to review expeditiously before November 8th, so we can get them registered to vote, how marijuana is scheduled under federal law. Federal law currently classifies marijuana as Schedule I of the Controlled Substance Act, the classification meant for the most dangerous substance. This is the same schedule as for heroin and LSD, and even higher than the classification of fentanyl and methamphetamine, the drugs that are driving our overdose epidemic. Well, Mr. President, let me ask you, what is being done by the federal government to stop the flow of fentanyl and the other ones, from coming across the border? Nothing. And then Mr. Biden, finally, even as federal and state regulation of marijuana changes, important limitations of trafficking, marketing, and underage sales should stay in place. Too many lives have been upended because of our failed approach to marijuana. It's time that we right these wrongs. Really, Mr. President, you consider upholding the law a wrong. He said that again. Let me read Alexander Hamilton. Quote, if the federal government should overpass the just bounds of its authority and make a tyrannical use of its power, the people whose creature it is must appeal to the standard they have formed and take such measures to redress the injury done to the Constitution as the exigency suggests and prudence justify, unquote. Now, here again, we have a president of the United States issuing, they didn't even call it an executive order, but it probably is an executive order, for the executive branch to create and change law. Everything that he proposes in here violates the Constitution of the United States. He's telling the Secretary of Health, Human Services, and Attorney General to go out and look at how to change the Controlled Substance Act. Who has the power to do that? The House and the Senate. They're the only ones. This goes back to the election laws, 2020. The attorney generals or the governor just issued, we could do mail-in ballots. We can do this. We can extend this. da 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 da. And it was against their constitution in the state. And judges are now ruling that they didn't have the power. Here's Joe Biden again, going beyond the bounds of their authority. And it's like what John Locke says. Once they do that, they've given away all authority. So here's Joe Biden, again, trying to get votes by giving pardons to all these people that have been in jail. Listen, if you were to go look, folks, at most of these convictions, there was more than just marijuana possession in those charges. No, seriously. There was something else in there too, some other felony or something else. Or they might have been on a parole and in possession of an illegal substance, violates your parole, and you go back to jail. Let me read this quote from Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Quote, humans fear reason, but they ought to fear stupidity, for reason can be hard, but stupidity can be fatal. Unquote. Where is the reason in Washington, D.C. right now? Where is it? It's in the handful of a few that are trying to hang on to the Constitution. And they're being shut up by the media. So, Mr. Biden, again, you have issued an edict that is totally unconstitutional. This has been discussed for umpteen years, but nothing has been done about it. Why? Because they know what I just told you. There was more to it than just a possession of marijuana. Now, also look at this. A lot of them were selling it. They were sellers and probably other drugs, and they pleaded down for a lesser sentence instead of possession to sell down to just possession. I used to know a prosecuting attorney here in town for the county. He said, we did that all the time, so we wouldn't have to go to court. We'd plead down, give them a slap on the wrist, judge put them in jail for 6 months, and they were done. But she also told me most of them had records. They'd already been in jail before. Humans fear reason. They ought to fear stupidity. And Albert Einstein said, the only thing more dangerous than ignorance is arrogance. And we have a lot of that in Washington, D.C. All right, moving along here, folks. I don't know if we're going to get to everything today. Yeah, we'll get there. Market's still down almost 300. Jeff Minich from Intellectual Takeout, one of my favorite authors, writers, journalists. He uses a lot of reason. You're going to hear this here. Age of Rage, 5 possible reasons for our current madness. We can come up with more than that, but he lists 5. Now, Jeff says, how do we arrive at a point, let me start over again. How did we arrive at a point in our history where gangs of hecklers chase politicians from restaurants, where Senate hearings have lost all decorum, where family members and friends part ways over politics? Starts out with a great question, doesn't he? Back to Jeff. Every day brings new examples of incivility and violence. In the last 24 hours, I've casually browsed several sites online. Here was a professor advocating castration for white politicians. Celebrities mocking a black singer for praising the president. Now, this is under Trump. Strangers leaving death threats on the phones of politicians, judges, and their families after the rulings by Supreme Court, right? Back in April, May and June. Anonymous callers phoning in false accusations of rape. Some wicked soul mailing the poison ricin to a Republican senator and to officials at the Pentagon. And yes, all of those things happen, folks. Back to Jeff. Only a quarter of a century ago, this ongoing malevolence would have shocked most Americans. Sure, conservatives and liberals attacked each other, but those disagreements resemble a dialogue in Plato's Academy compared to the howls and antics we find in 2022. That's where reason comes in, folks. Then he asks the question, why is this? Here are 5 possible answers. Technological advances, number 1. 25 years ago, the internet and cell phones were in their infancy. Twitter was a noise made by sparrows in the yard. These devices are wonderful, but allow every bozo with an opinion, including myself, this is Jeff, to shout that opinion into cyberspace instantaneously and often anonymously. From school bullying to Supreme Court nominations, our technology gives us the power to destroy a fellow human being with threats and insults. That's number 1, technological advances. Remember, you can believe everything on the internet. Abraham Lincoln. Number 2, university ideology. Remember when many people, liberals and conservatives alike, poke fun at the political correctness on campus? Well, those smiles are gone. PC remains rampant in our educational institutions. Only now graduates of Harvard, Duke, Stanford, and a few hundred other colleges have injected PC into the world of business and government. In our public universities, we have long tolerated professors calling for radical changes to American society. The agents of this transformation are now sitting in boardrooms and on government committees. Not only university ideology, but in K through 12 ideology. It's all over. They're teaching 5-year-olds now. They're showing pictures of 5-year-olds, this is one school, of anal sex. That teacher should be in jail for showing pornography. CRT, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They teach all these racial things, these falsehoods, the hate of America. Number 3, historical ignorance. Google, this is what he's saying. I want you to go Google or do a search, Americans ignorant about history. I might do that. I didn't do that. Magazines are different as the Atlantic, American Heritage, and National Review feature articles lamenting this lack of knowledge about our past. In 2011, for example, the majority of adults didn't know that the Constitution was the supreme law of the land, going back to Dr. McMaster's. Continuing with Jeff. Others can't identify the Bill of Rights, the Gettysburg Address, or the reason for celebrating Independence Day. And sadly, Jeff is correct. Sadly, Dr. McMaster's was correct. Continuing, George Santayana famously remarked, quote, "Those who don't remember the past are condemned to repeat it," unquote. Given the dumbing down of our citizenry regarding history, he may be wrong. Instead of repeating history, we may instead descend into a dystopia we can't even imagine. 50 years of steering away from courses in basic civics and denigrating American achievements have produced a bumper crop of malice. Thank you, Jeff. You say it nicer than I do. By dumbing them down, taking away your basic civics, you get people to hate America. That's what he just said. Let's see. My cousin's son graduated high school, 8 years ago? They didn't teach civics. They didn't teach history. You had to go request a United States history course. In his senior year, he requested it the last half of the year. And he went in, signed up. His grandmother encouraged him to do it when she found out you could do it, because he lived with my aunt. Went in, signed up for it, and got a notice, like right before Christmas break. We're not going to be holding that class. Only 2 people signed up for it, so we're not going to hold it. Here were 2 students that wanted to know about U.S. history and were denied the opportunity. All right, back to Jeff. 4, politics as religion. Many Americans have taken politics many Americans have taken politics for their religion, fanatical as any Reformation Calvinist or Catholics. We make gods of our politicians and demons of our opponents and their leaders. We are on the side of the angels, and they conspire with devils. Well put, Jeff. Well put. Number 5, Washington, D.C. Follow the money is a journalistic axiom. Okay, let's follow some money. Of the 25 richest counties in the United States, 11 are located in the area surrounding Washington, D.C. The city also hosts administrators and employees of government, think tanks, lobbying groups, and private businesses involved in federal endeavors. In other words, the scorpion bottle of our animosities is not in Boise, nor in Austin, nor in Minneapolis. It's in D.C. These and more are reasons for our division. What some have called a cold civil war, continuing, I can't offer any grand solutions, but I can think of a small one. I think it's a big one. If we would just talk to each other and ask each other questions, person to person, without all the cacophony of the mainstream media and the politicians, if we could agree to disagree and then vote, then maybe we could find our way back to a country we can love. Absolutely, folks. Now, let me, I read the one about Noam Chomsky. Nobody's going to pour truth into your brain. It's something you have to find out on your own. But let me read Ayn Rand. Hatred of the good for being good is the hallmark of the 20th century. This is the enemy you are facing. Hatred of the good for being good. Wise words. Wise words. So let's listen to this. And this is from 9/11. What's the organization? 9/11. They organize the 9/11 Day of Service every year. I can't think of the organization, but this is from their website. Return to Unitedness.
Let's clear brain, guys. Can't see nothing in front of me.
There once was a place where our differences did not matter. Where strangers stood shoulder to shoulder with outstretched arms and an urge to help.
Where neighbors showed up for neighbors and everyone was our brother or sister.
Connected by nothing more than wanting to do good.
Where everyday people dropped everything to pitch in.
To be a frontliner, a rescuer. A hero when it mattered most, no questions asked.
To get back to that place, all we need to do is remember the 11th of September.
9/11 was a tragedy of unspeakable pain.
But it was also a moment of togetherness.
And a reminder of what we have in common.
A time when people were willing to give whatever they could.
Even at the risk of their own well-being. A moment of compassion when we all felt more alike than different.
Because in that moment, we were in a state of unitedness.
9/11 proved we're not really divided.
Not when it truly matters.
Let's once again take a moment.
A moment to do a good deed this September 11th.
Done by me, you, us, and millions more.
Dona tu tiempo. Dona un abrigo de invierno.
Or just hold open a door. That kind of thing.
Deeds big and small. That would be a start.
Let's get back to that state of unitedness.
And let's never forget what we're capable of doing together.
Great message, folks. Treat each other as individuals. Jeff Minnick said that. Talk person to person. Sometimes that's a challenge. They don't want to talk to you. They don't want to hear a different opinion. They don't want to hear about how you feel or know. They don't want to hear facts. And that's a shame. Sitting down and talking. Return to unitedness in America. Don't look at people from a group. They're an individual. So like that article I read by Dick Toomey. We're all sovereign. We're ourselves. And we should treat each other as such. You're an individual. What do you like? What do you think? Now, here's another article that came out on the same day by Jeff Minnick from Intellectual Takeout. If you're not following them, follow them. They have some good writers there. Again, the question that no one asks or answers. Years ago, a preschooler used to annoy me to no end whenever I visited his parents. It wasn't what he did, but what he said, or rather asked. Here's a typical example of our dialogue. To get the full effect, try to imagine his question delivered in a drawn-out monotone. I think I'm going to go out on the porch for a bit, I might say. Why? He would ask. It's a nice day. Why? The sun's shining. Why? That's when the sun does. That's what the sun does in the daytime. Why? Because, I'd say, but even replying with that magic word designed to kill further adult-child conversation had no effect. Why? You get the picture. That was long ago, and while I don't remember what was passing through my mind, I can safely guess that my thoughts were unkind. But now, all I can say is, where's that dimpled master of interrogation when we need him? Recently, I've read more articles than usual about the invasion of our southern border. This river of illegal immigrants now includes not only people from Central America and South America, but also asylum seekers from such far-flung places as China, Africa, and the Middle East. Ex-Green Beret and war correspondent Michael Yon says in one report, that's what he reported. He also warns that if worldwide food shortages occur next year, which appears likely, the storm of immigrants will turn into a tsunami. Since Joe Biden became president, up to 5 million people from more than 150 countries have illegally made their way into the United States, including nearly 1 million gotaways who slipped past enforcement officials. Most of these immigrants are seeking work and a better life, but a number of them are criminals. Some are mules for the drug traffic, and others are slaves of the cartels or victims of sex trafficking. And the Biden administration has turned its back to all of this. In Washington, some politicians oppose this flood of illegal immigrants. Some reporters and bloggers write about the need to crack down on border regulation, vetting immigrants, and turning more of them away. And right there is where we need that little kid and his question, why? Because no one ever explains to the rest of us why we are permitting this situation in the first place. Do you see how these three articles are tying together today? From Dr. McMaster and these two by Jeff Minich. Why does the government of the United States permit this flood of immigrants? It could close the border if it chooses to do so in a week's time or less. It could simply proclaim enough is enough, and that would be the end of the whole shebang. But it doesn't. And as a result, the drug cartels are having a field day. Fentanyl smuggled into our country is killing tens of thousands of Americans, and that number is now in the hundreds of thousands. And we'll be paying everything from social benefits to educational costs for these intruders for decades to come, or until the money runs out. So allow me to play that pesky boy and ask, why? And since no one replies, I'm stuck with the only answer that seems obvious. Mass immigration is a tool designed to radically change the United States of America, that it will become unrecognizable. You get that, folks? They're trying to change who we are, we the people. And if that is the case, then the question becomes not why, but who. Who is behind this policy? Excuse me. Given our president's declining cognitive powers, we can safely bet Joe Biden's not the engine driving this bus. He lacks the mental wherewithal, the motive, and the brain cells to devise such a plot. Jeff is just confirming what a lot of people know. He's just a symbol. He's a puppet. Back to Jeff. So who's got their hands on the steering wheel? Is it White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain? Does former President Barack Obama have influence in the Oval Office? Or are Biden and his handlers passengers like the rest of us, giving our tickets to ride by the World Economic Forum and some of our wealthiest billionaires? Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think you know the answer. And listening to Russell Voigt the other day, Renew American Purpose, you understand what is going on. And this is more confirmation. Back to Jeff. I know I sound like one more conspiracy nut, but here's the difference. I like the financial means and probably the equipment and intelligence to get to the root of the question, but I can still ask it. Why? I can still ask it. Why? Why are we allowing our border to be overrun? What's the purpose? And if no one can give a straight answer to that question, even a radical one, then something is very, very wrong. Jeff Minich. Thank you, Jeff, for this openness and this understanding of what's going on. And this goes back, another quote by Ayn Rand, defiance, not obedience, is the American answer to overbearing authority. And folks, when authority violates the rule of law, then we need to be defiant. I'm looking at the time here. Let me play this by Ronald Reagan. A Time for Choosing. I'm sure many of you have heard this. You've probably read it. This is just part of this speech, a little over 4 minutes. His whole speech. You need to go read his whole speech, A Time of Choosing, to understand what's going on. But let's listen right now.
Those who would trade our freedom for the soup kitchen of the welfare state have told us they have a utopian solution of peace without victory. They call their policy accommodation. And they say if we'll only avoid any direct confrontation with the enemy, he'll forget his evil ways and learn to love us. All who oppose them are indicted as warmongers. They say we offer simple answers to complex problems. Well, perhaps there is a simple answer. Not an easy answer, but simple. If you and I have the courage to tell our elected officials that we want our national policy based on what we know in our hearts is morally right, we cannot buy our security, our freedom from the threat of the bomb, by committing an immorality so great as saying to 1 billion human beings now enslaved behind the Iron Curtain, give up your dreams of freedom, because to save our own skins, we're willing to make a deal with your slave masters. Alexander Hamilton said, a nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one. Now let's set the record straight. There's no argument over the choice between peace and war, but there's only one guaranteed way you can have peace, and you can have it in the next second: surrender. Admittedly, there's a risk in any course we follow other than this, but every lesson of history tells us that the greater risk lies in appeasement. And this is the specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face, that their policy of accommodation is appeasement. And it gives no choice between peace and war, only between fight or surrender. If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat, eventually we have to face the final demand, the ultimatum. And what then? Well, Nikita Khrushchev has told his people he knows what our answer will be. He has told them that we're retreating under the pressure of the Cold War, and someday, when the time comes to deliver the final ultimatum, our surrender will be voluntary, because by that time, we will have been weakened from within spiritually, morally, and economically. He believes this because from our side he's heard voices pleading for peace at any price, or better read than dead, or as one commentator put it, he'd rather live on his knees than die on his feet. And therein lies the road to war, because those voices don't speak for the rest of us. You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery. If nothing in life is worth dying for, when did this begin? Just in the face of this enemy? Or should Moses have told the children of Israel to live in slavery under the Pharaohs? Should Christ have refused the cross? Should the patriots at Concord Bridge have thrown down their guns and refused to fire the shot heard round the world? The martyrs of history were not fools. And our honored dead, who gave their lives to stop the advance of the Nazis, didn't die in vain. Where then is the road to peace? Well, it's a simple answer after all. You and I have the courage to say to our enemies, there is a price we will not pay. There is a point beyond which they must not advance. This is the meaning, in the phrase of Barry Goldwater, peace through strength. Winston Churchill said the destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals. And he said there's something going on in time and space and beyond time and space, which, whether we like it or not, spells duty. You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We'll preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we'll sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness. We will keep in mind and remember that Barry Goldwater has faith in us. He has faith that you and I have the ability and the dignity and the right to make our own decisions and determine our own destiny. Thank you very much.
That was Ronald Reagan, 1964. 1964. Those words are as true today as they were then. We were in the middle of the Cold War. Khrushchev was gaining ground in America. I told you about the goals of communism, Marxism, to take over America. I need to do a show on that. Appeasement that was going on. Appeasement started World War II. England and France and others were just, give Germany what they want. Let's sign these agreements. Poland signed the agreement and got invaded the next day. You can't surrender your way to freedom, folks. It doesn't happen. All right. We've got a caller. Let's go to this caller. We just have a few minutes left on the program, so let's see who's here. All right, welcome to the Medlock Post.
Yeah, that speech of Ronald Reagan is tantamount. And I tell you, too, the debate he had against Carter was tantamount. You want to see a good debate? And I have to take my hat off. Even the Democrat Carter was a lot better than what you see going on today. Oh,
Carter looks like a genius compared to what we've got going on today.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And his speech is like what Ronald Reagan made. His speech is like what Barbara Jordan made about immigration when she said it's not a right, it's a privilege. And she was a Democrat. What happened to those types during those days? That needs to be taught to our kids because they're dumb. Kids today are dumb. And it's showing when we fall for these pandemics, when we fall for this global awokeness, they are dumbed down in schools. They don't know. That's why come they don't go after you and I. They go after the kids.
That's correct. And you look at all their programs they're putting together, it's going after the kids. They've pushed the parents out of there, and now the parents are fighting back and saying, "Whoa, time out here! You're killing our kids' brains." Now, what's your first name and where are you from?
Well, my name is Pianki, Pianki. I'm calling from either the Deep South or the Midwest, Missouri, depends on what time of the year, because the best teachers I've had was ducks.
Well, thank you for calling. These are some great points. And have you listened to the whole show?
No, I was coming from another show, and I seen your topic here about who would defend the Constitution. I will, but I'm not as spunky as I was when I was in my 20s, but I'm going to do the best I can.
That's right. We do the best we can. We use what we can. Yeah, I'm not as spunky either. And thanks for tuning in. I would suggest go back and listen to the complete show. What we do here is education and enlightenment and empower. And if you go back and start listening to from the beginning, my first broadcast was We the People, and then a lot of education. And I've had some guests on. I've got some guests coming on next week. That one has been on before, Lady Up America, that has a great Christian organization going. And so we're trying to educate the people. And if you go back and listen to today's program, you're going to see how I tied in a lot of things and got to the point playing A Time for Choosing. We're at that point. Matter of fact, we're past that point, folks.
You're absolutely right. We passed the 2-minute warning.
You know,
and if you educate the people that they got the power through the position of the state, quote, the countries, North Carolina, Missouri, Louisiana, New Mexico, South Dakota, they are countries that have been conveniently called states. They have the power to control this runaway federal government, and by golly, they got to do it. If not, ain't no telling where the hell we're going to be.
So you're a supporter of Convention of States?
You're absolutely right. I'm a supporter of Convention of States as long as they stay on topic.
Well, they are. I've had some people on go back to one of mine. It's titled Convention of States, and I had some people on that have been very much involved in it, and I'm trying to get Mark Mackley on here, or Markley, but he's out campaigning right now, so it might be after the election before I get him on here. So this is what we do here, and tell all your friends. I think if you go back and listen, we're in education. You can go back to previous programs and see the education that's taking place, and it's not just a show.
That's what's needed. That's good what you're doing. This is what's needed. This is what we have to do, because, you know, these things go on in steps. You know, the right to petition is one step. Then you go to physical protest, the second step. Then beyond that, it's like when you hem a fox up in a corner. Between you stands freedom, and he will fight you to the bitter end. I'm going to let you go, friend. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, because we only have 2 minutes left. Thank you for calling, and please call again. We appreciate these thoughts and listening, and tell your friends about us. So you have a great day. Will. The battle will be won. All right. A great call, some great comments. There are a lot of Americans out there that are patriotic. They're stepping up. They don't like what they see, what they've been watching. We're seeing this appeasement on our foreign policy in D.C. right now. It's making America weak. It's making our enemies strong. They know it. Washington, D.C. knows it, but that's what they want. And this is what we need to stop. So a great call. Appreciate those calls. And I've got other things. They'll just have to wait to another show, because we're less than a minute now. And we just, let's play Rock Steady, folks. Let's be rock steady in our efforts to sustain and support the Constitution, to fight the wrongs that are being run, to be defiant, as Ayn Rand says, be defiant in this abuse of power. So keep it up, folks. End of the week, it's Friday, end of the week. We will see you Monday. Have a great weekend. Contemplate what you heard today and think about it. Thank you so much for being here and supporting us.